loading up real quick. All right. Double check. Yep, and we are live. Okay. Let me do a brief introduction. Thank you so much for joining me for the Meet the Curator event series. This series is made possible by the Harold S. Seabrook Charitable Trust and Kline Family Foundation. I'm Chaney, Jewell, the curator of the Arts and Science Center for Southeast Arkansas, and today I will be talking with artist Dustyn Bork. Bork is a printmaker and painter who often works in mixed media and focuses on the cultural notions of pattern, color, and design. He is Associate Professor of Art at Lyon College, and his works have been exhibited regionally, nationally, and internationally. His work, Shape Number 8, is currently within ASC's exhibition From the Vault. So thank you so much for joining us, Dustyn.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity. And I want to thank the Arts and Science Center also for the opportunity last year to have an exhibition, but then also to collect the work, to purchase a piece, and to put it in this current exhibition. So thank you. And thanks for everyone for tuning in as well.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure for us to have your work within our permanent collection, and we'll make sure to take care of it. So let's go ahead and jump into questions. So first, I want to ask you, what's your background? So your educational background, where are you from, and were you raised very involved in the art world? Your path to becoming an artist more convoluted?
So I'm originally from Monroe, Michigan. It's southern downriver Detroit area, southeastern Michigan. I would say it's not typically an area where you would think that an artist would come from, or sort of growing up. I wasn't necessarily steeped in this sort of artistic or cultural environment. But that said, my parents were very supportive. My mom is very artistic as a person. I don't think she would ever call herself an artist, but when I was younger, she was always doing something, whether it was a craft or a quilt or a painting, sewing, that sort of thing. So it was really inspirational for me. I thought growing up to be an artist was just really unattainable and out of reach. I had an opportunity to, in high school, I was interested in art. I love to draw. And I had an opportunity to do a assistantship at a silk screen place. And so that really gave me the idea that it's possible to tie your passion with actually a career that you could maybe even eke out in existence. I went to undergrad at the University of Michigan and got a BFA in printmaking, and then went on to graduate school at Indiana University, and they have an amazing facility, a great program. Also got an MFA in printmaking there at IU. You know, I've really enjoyed making art my whole life, and I've just been fortunate to be able to stick with it and make a decent go at it. So I'd say, you know, in terms of my background, it's not necessarily felt like I was making the most direct path to art, but just had an opportunity to study art and just stick with it, and been really fortunate because of that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for that introduction to your background. And for the next question, and this is something that I was very interested in particular with your work because of sort of the uniqueness of the shapes that you choose, and also with your background in printmaking, and sort of what led you to choose your medium of art, because it doesn't seem like it would be something that's readily available. It seemed like it was very much a stylistic choice on your end.
Yeah, so it was partially that start in silkscreen to, but that was very commercial. And, you know, we were printing t-shirts for companies, and I did that in high school. And so then when I went to undergrad, you know, I took a I took drawing classes, art history classes, and I always felt like I was an outsider, or that there were a lot of other artists that were a lot more talented or smarter, or had, you know, all this experience in their high school in Chicago or New York, and I felt really far behind. But when it came to printmaking, it was something like, oh, wow, look at this, is here something that I really gravitate towards. I enjoy it. And maybe other people don't know what it is, don't know what the expectation of it is, or the potential for it. So I just was really drawn to printmaking. I started more, you know, I've become really interested in abstraction, and I've focused on it ever since undergraduate. But at first, my work was really kind of figurative and cartoony, and I would have never thought that I would wind up pursuing abstraction as, you know, a style or subject matter. But in printmaking, what's really interesting is if you're developing a color image, and whether it's etching or woodcut or screen print, essentially what you're doing is you're taking an image and you're taking it apart layer by layer. And so I got really interested in these separate layers that maybe came together to build an image, but they were in themselves very interesting visually, and they were abstract, and they were derived from nature or other things that I was looking at the time. And so for a while, it was, how can I, you know, artistically enhance these things that are layers to make this image make sense as being from the real world. Later, I just started to get really lost in the layers themselves. It's sort of like, you know, I remember when I was a kid, I used to like to take, much to the chagrin of my parents, I used to take things apart, like radios or TVs, and be really interested in the inner workings, and then think that I could fix it or put it back together, but I was terrible at that. It was just the idea of taking it apart. And so for printmaking, for me, was that same experience. And it always has been. It's sort of like taking it apart, and who cares if you put it back together? And so really I've stuck with that in terms of my approach to making art. And painting for me as well is, you know, for printmaking, it's a lot of times you're able to make multiples. So you can exhibit the same print in multiple locations. You have one in Chicago, one in, you know, California, and then sell, you know, multiple copies. Whereas a painting as a singular object only exists in one place. So a lot of times what I'm doing with painting is trying to mimic the effect of what I do in printmaking, but maybe it's not conducive to the process of printmaking or the techniques. So I think it's also a way to work larger, like the works you're talking about, the shaped pieces. It's a way of shifting the focus from something that's smaller, more of an object and intimate, to something that's larger, taking on the role of more of a form that's similar to architecture. And so it's both of those sort of modes that I really like to work in. And I think it's you know, sometimes I think you choose a medium because you're good at it, but other times you choose a medium because it's the best way or the only way to express that particular idea. If I could do the same thing with video art, if I could do the same thing with sculpture, I'm not going to rule that out. I could you know, explore that as well as a technique or as a medium.
Well, do you also sort of consider your works to be sculptures because they are typically these abstract shapes and they are done on wood? And also, I was very curious just in terms of you discussing the layers. So I guess this is two questions. In terms of the layers, do you typically consider it almost to be a collage of a lot of different buildings or maybe different parts of nature? Or do you focus in on one building in particular or one part of nature that you've seen?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, it's such a convoluted process that a lot of times the source image, and sometimes I'll show like, here's the photo that I based it on. And sometimes they're very literal. And you can see exactly this little snippet of a building or a window or a shadow that's cast across a building and on the ground. So it's all from the built environment, but sometimes it just goes through so many filters and different kind of, you know, variations that I'll take it into the studio that it gets so far removed from the original source. And I'm okay with that, you know, that it gets shifted. And the layering idea for me really relates to the subject matter as well. Like if you think about, you know, some of the sources that I'm looking at is architecture, how it's built, how it's constructed, how it impacts us, the sort of space that we inhabit. And so as I'm making things that are layered or I'm making things that are shaped, yeah, if they take on that object feel or if they take on that sculptural feel, it makes sense. Or if you think about like the patina of an old building, how there's like layers and layers of paint. And maybe the degradation of a deteriorated surface in some ways is more beautiful than the original, sort of the unexpected. So for me, I really have to take my work through that process as well. So there's this sort of like really controlled, but then also the very organic or intuitive process that develops over the course of reworking an image again and again, and sort of planning it out, but just letting things happen too. I think you have to strike a balance as an artist between those modes of working.
Beautiful. And I think that's so fascinating, the idea of these added layers of paint and comparison between your work and sort of these older buildings that we see. So your work is abstract, and sometimes people can say that abstract work can be convoluted in its meaning and in its interpretation. Do you find that you're seeking to have a clear interpretation of your work whenever people are viewing it, or it's more of a you get what you get visually and allowing people to interpret it for themselves?
I start with a particular meaning, and that's personal, and that is the guiding point for me. It's almost like a mantra that you're considering in the studio, and it's like, okay, this piece describes this body of work or fits into this vein, so I'll keep it. This doesn't kind of fit into that vocabulary, so I'll exclude it. That for me is motivation. That is what triggers the work and inspires the work. I know its meaning. Now, in terms of like how people see that, I have an artist statement, and that's one thing. And then the work is another thing, right? And it's saying that I'm inspired by architecture, I'm inspired by the built environment and how we respond to these structures around us. But that's okay. I think for me, there's ambiguity, but there's also certainty. There's this sort of idea that it's open for interpretation. And I think that's great, right? So what I see in it might be different than what a viewer sees in it. And I think sometimes artists think that there's only one way to read a work, or that the statement in a way kind of has to explain the work in such a way that everybody has to understand it. And art isn't universal. I think it's some of the, not necessarily that's vague, but sometimes the way that it's subjective can really stick with us, and we can question that. And I think sometimes people consider abstraction as being very challenging. And I don't understand that. I think abstract art is some of the most simple art. Like if you compare it to like figurative art or art that is sequential or art that it has a narrative, you're talking about much more complex themes and meaning and more of a statement probably that goes into it. For me, abstraction is just really guttural, it's emotional. And I think if you're a viewer, you should just have confidence in saying, like, if I can recognize that I enjoy the shapes, or I like the pattern, or I like the color, that's good enough. And that is deciding and divining the meaning right there. And I think all too often people are maybe turned off by museum culture or the sort of like intellectual wave through, and get sort of jaded about the art experience. Yes. And I think, and I think, first look at the work, first experience the work, then see the title card and see what that says. And then maybe dig and read the artist bio or look at their website. I think it's the more you look, the more you will gain. And just, I think as a viewer, you really have to trust yourself. So I have an intended meaning, but I can also allow people to sort of stray from that and allow their own subjective emotional response to feed into it. I really like the quote by Picasso too, that, art is an idea that you start with and then it becomes something else. And I think once you, as an artist, once you put your work out into the world, you have to allow it to have that sort of second version of your original idea. I feel like people really shouldn't struggle with abstraction. That's my hope. That's like my, my life's mission, like make people feel better about accepting the abstraction. I think it's interesting because if people are listening to music, and maybe it's jazz, or maybe it's country, or maybe it's something that's a little outside their comfort zone. They'll say, I don't really like that, or I don't really appreciate that, but they never question if it's a song, right? And I think for art, for some reason, it just, okay, I don't know if that's art because I don't understand it. And then it's just, I'm going to rule it out entirely. I don't know that that's necessarily happening when people view my work. I think sometimes, like, I had a great time at the Arts and Science Center on Family Fun Day in 2019. We did that, I think it was in February. And I had the shaped paintings in the gallery. And then I brought screens with me that had the shapes exposed to them on a screen. And then we worked with young kids, and they printed the shapes on their shirts. And then they went out and they stood next to the paintings, and they recognized, oh, this shape came from that painting. I think their response in some way was like the most pure and intentional way of understanding what abstraction is and what art can mean, what it is describing.
Yes, I agree completely. In college, I actually taught art appreciation, and one of the things we hammered home is just being able to enjoy things just visually, asking people, where does your eye naturally go whenever you look at the artwork? Where does it focus on, and then where does it end? And enjoying that. And because I think that a lot of people do focus in maybe too heavily on the meaning, and feeling like they need to understand the artist's statement and what they were trying to say from the art, and not being able to enjoy it. So yes, I think those are some great points. And I hope that some people who might be a little weary of abstract art are listening and can maybe look and appreciate and see abstract art from a different perspective, because I think it's something that not a lot of people talk about. Yeah, that was great. Let's see what else. So what inspires you as an artist? You talked a lot about buildings and nature, and sort of taking these inspirations, but do you have any possible artist influences, trends, movements, time periods, what have you?
Definitely, yeah. For me, I'm constantly looking. I think it's important as an artist to look, and I'm just a big fan of art. You mentioned teaching an art appreciation course, and I think sometimes when we're teaching art, it slows us down, and it's a better process for seeing the art in a new way. So I'm always looking. I teach art history. I'm fortunate enough to be able to teach at a small school where I not only teach studio art classes, but I also teach some art history classes. So I'm always interested in doing research on art and seeing works in person. One of my biggest influences, and one artist that really inspires me, is Mark Rothko. I think if you look at my work, you can kind of see like the faded color edges, color fields, color blocking, and just being immersed. His work was more about landscapes and emotion, and sort of the pure expression of very, disparate feelings or emotions. My work is a little bit more literally interpreting concrete things like architecture, but there's a similarity there. Last October, I had the opportunity to go do a residency, a symposium at the Mark Rothko Art Center in Daugavpils, Latvia. Shout out to those guys.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was definitely like once in a lifetime opportunity, dream of mine to be able to go do that. Daugavpils, Latvia is where Mark Rothko was born. So it was his childhood home before he emigrated to the United States, first in the Northwest and then to New York City. And so I was there for a few weeks, and they turned this old, it had been part of a military base in the Napoleonic War era, and they took this building and made it into an art museum and dedicated to Mark Rothko's work. And every year they put 6 new Rothkos up. And so, and on the second floor of this arsenal building, I stayed in a nice room, slept above these Mark Rothko paintings. So I'm just like dreaming of Rothko. During the day, I could go down and see them. And then every day had an amazing studio, just a stone's throw in the same building from where I slept. Worked with, there was 10 artists that were there from all over the globe. And that was a really inspirational moment. One of those things that I'm still sort of unpacking. I had an opportunity to make 5 pieces while I was there, plus some small works on paper. And 2 of those pieces that I made became part of the permanent collection at the Mark Rothko Art Center. So I'm still kind of unpacking, that shift in making work there and being, influenced by Rothko and seeing where it takes my work next. I think my work is inspired by my personal life as well. I just don't necessarily know how. I think there's sort of cycles in your own persona and your identity of like when you're drawn to certain things. I've definitely felt, depressed in part of my life or dealt with anxiety, and art can be, an amazing therapy and an outlet for that. And there's other times where I felt very happy and joyful. And I think my art in its use of color can reflect that as well. My wife, Carly Dahl, is an artist. She's also the executive director at the Batesville Area Arts Council here in Batesville, Arkansas. She runs the gallery. She's also an artist, a visual artist, and she's a huge inspiration in my life personally, but also visually. It's great to have an extra set of critical eyes on your work. A lot of times when I'm struggling with something in the studio, she'll come take a look at it. She'll give me some advice, and I kind of get to the finish line quicker because she's there sort of, cheering me on, but also giving me some tough advice, like, hey, this area, not so good. This area I think is developed, keep working on that. I, of course, can't return a favor to her. But it's great to be married to an artist and to, I think it's really difficult to be married to an artist. So I think when you're married to another person that's creative, that can understand the kind of ebbs and flow, that the tides that you go through as an artist, and that there's going to be sometimes you spend 16 hours in the studio or you're just kind of like being introspective. And I think it's sort of a give and take in a relationship. So being part of, we've been married now for 9 years, being part of a relationship that loves the same thing, that's pursuing the same thing, that likes to go to museums, that is looking at life with a similar, artists are kind of weird, right? Artists are weirdos, and we see
the best way.
Great weirdos. I love artists, but we see the world differently. And I think to be able to express yourself and have someone that's supportive of you has just been a huge inspiration in my life personally, but also artistically. I can definitely say since I've been in a relationship with Carly that my work has gotten much better.
Oh, that's so amazing, and I can't wait to do more research into your wife's work. And that is a good segue for something that just popped up into my mind, since we are sort of in the middle of a unique situation with COVID-19, and a lot of people are self-quarantining, and they have been for a long time. So you've probably been spending a lot of time with your wife. But I've also been talking to artists who say that their routine hasn't really changed. Some people have said that we're all in the middle of this traumatic experience that is dramatically impacting their emotions. Could you see quarantine and possibly COVID affecting your art, or at least the emotions and intention you're putting into your art?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's hard not to. It's an experience. And so whatever experiencing, whether it's direct or indirect, whatever you're experiencing as an artist, that's going to register in your work emotionally. It's going to trigger different mark making, all of that. And so I've been thinking about it, and I've been trying to make work that doesn't necessarily directly address COVID-19, but our lives did shift, Carly and myself. Like, first of all, teaching at a small private liberal arts college at Lyon College, our thing is like mentoring and close relationships and interacting with students. So it was really difficult to move remote in March. I mean, I know a lot of people are in tougher situations than that, but for me, that was a shift, right? So just thinking about how to reach my students was a change. My day-to-day changed. So I was recording lectures, which was really awkward, instead of, having a room full of students. But that made me realize, and we tried to stay home more. We've been really trying to practice social distancing and staying at home, eating at home more, which I really enjoy cooking. And so at first I wasn't going to my studio, which is on campus. I was staying at home to work. So that shifted working on larger things and the project that I was currently exploring to working on smaller things that I could do at home. Carly has a studio in our house. It's a really nice studio. It's on the second floor. She's not too messy when she works. I'm terribly messy when I work. So I've been working on the table, the dining room table, and no painting. I've been doing collages. So I'm taking old work, cutting them up, and making these real, and they're loosely inspired. They're floor plans of houses. So you're thinking about, staying at home, sheltering in place, and how we can sort of be alone together. Carly might be upstairs weaving, or someone's watching TV or listening to music, and the other person's creating, and we can occupy, and just for anyone too, the same kind of idea of like, we can be together but also be alone at the same time with these floor plans that I'm doing, these small collages. But I think it might relate too to other people that are experiencing alone together as well. Like, we're all going through this together, but we're very much isolated at the same time. So I've been thinking about that as I've been working, and we'll see. I don't know where it's going to go. I think, like you mentioned, it's definitely different. And there are a lot of artists that maybe are just keep on doing what they've been doing. And other artists are, I know a lot of artists in New York City, and they couldn't go to their studios during lockdown, or artists in Detroit that were on lockdown. So they had to work in their homes and completely shifted. So I think it's going to be like this sort of, like, if you're thinking about like art history as like sedimentation and different strata, like there's going to be this period for the next few years where maybe it's not immediate, but we're going to see this ripple-like effect of how COVID-19 and being locked out from your studio is definitely is going to affect art. The fact that you're doing this, I think, is awesome. I think it's connecting artists and patrons in a new way in this new COVID-19 era as well. And I think that is very impactful and powerful and really inspiring as well. I've seen, and I just feel so bad for my artist friends that had big exhibitions they've been planning for 2 years in museums or galleries, and then nobody can go to it. And they're like, trying to show it in social media and virtually. We're experiencing art in a different way. And I think what's been positive, though, is a lot of artists have found another venue, another outlet, another way. Like, you kind of can teach an old dog new tricks. And so we're adding some new, collectively as artists, we're adding some new skills and techniques to our arsenal, because we've been kind of shut out of the traditional modes of production, but also exhibition, working with curators, working with patrons, working with people, clients that are going to buy work. And so it's definitely shifted how I've worked in thinking about art, but who knows long term what it's really going to mean.
I'll be really curious to see all the artists and what happens and what new trends will come up because of this. And also just in the hope that everyone is going to make it out of this stronger artists that are more in love with the field versus being discouraged, because I know this is a tough time for everyone, but I've been seeing just some absolutely spectacular work from so many artists. I think this has been a great period of producing artwork, but also, of course, there are people who are unable to produce work. And also, I think society and hopefully viewers and museum visitors, gallery attendees are being understanding to those people. So for one last question, just to kind of wrap up, why art? Out of any profession, use of time, creative outlet, why art and why your art?
That's a great question. It's hard, and so many people probably switch careers or switch jobs or interests or passion. And I don't know why it stuck, but it did. It's something that I just have always enjoyed doing, and I've just kept at it. If I'm thinking about how I wound up here, I'm just very fortunate. I love being in Arkansas. I remember when I was younger and I first started in art, I thought I'd eventually live in a place like LA or New York. And, that was kind of the dream. And I think that's how most people think, okay, it's that, or it's nothing, right? And for me, and if you think about like going from Michigan, going from the Midwest, going to the South, it's you start to see the benefits and how it's sort of a more laid back environment. I've had some great art opportunities since I've been in Arkansas. Have had more art sales. So the market's smaller, but I think people recognize in Arkansas when there are artists that are serious, or even in the South in general, it becomes this really tight knit, close community. So for me, it's always just felt like art is part of me. I really think too that, you're talking about art appreciation too, or like connecting people to art and how to see art. And it's, for me, I've always felt like, and the more I get into art, the more it becomes clear to me that, and a life that's dedicated to art is a life that's worth living. So for me, it's like, I'm passionate about art. I love it. It's like what I want to do. It's what I want to make. I don't know if it's any good, but I just love the fact that I get to make it. People, thank you. I wasn't looking for a compliment, I swear. If I get to make it and people look at it, and some people every now and again want to buy it, that's amazing. I love to go to museums and galleries and talk to other artists. I'm not the most talented artist. I'm not the most hardest working. If I'm looking back on how I got a start in art, there was people that I went to school with that were way more talented than me, that were way just better at drawing or using color. And it wasn't the fact that I was good at it. It was just the fact that I stuck with it. I think that I've been able to, from the time that I was 18 really to now I'm 43. I'm gonna be 44 tomorrow. Tomorrow's my birthday.
Oh, happy early birthday. Thank you so much for joining us the day before your birthday.
I love it. It's perfect.
Something nice planned for you.
Thank you. We'll see. Who knows? It's like plans change, but we're thinking about getting some takeout from Tavolo's, our favorite Italian restaurant in Batesville. So nice little shout out to those guys. But for me, I felt like for a while, like, who am I kidding? Who am I fooling? At some point, someone's going to figure this out. He's a fraud. I guess, we think about that now in terms of education. We call that imposter syndrome, right? I've always felt that. Like there's this duality where you feel like I'm just faking it. But then this other part of you, it's like, yeah, but I've been getting away with it for so long that I should just keep doing it. Yeah, just keep going with it. And so, it's more about perseverance. And I don't know what else I would do. What am I going to do? And so for me, it's just something that I've just always been really attracted to. I love it. I enjoy doing it. For all the young artists out there and all my students that are worried about, can I do this? And am I going to be able to support myself? I had 2 kids when I was really, really young. They're older now. Shout out to Eddie, my oldest, and Aiden, who hopefully are watching this. I don't know. Hi, if you are. So I felt like, hey, I'm willing to starve for my art, but I'm not willing to let my kids starve for my art. So if you're up and coming and you're trying to be an artist, you find ways, and I think the more you are sort of broadly educated, try your hand at many different things. Don't just narrowly focus on one area. Like we've been doing the murals and that sort of thing. And that's a way to get your art more visible. Or someone that's maybe a ceramicist that also does graphic design. They can do the thing they love, but also do the creative thing that pays the bills. And not to say that graphic design isn't creative. I mean, some people, that is their art. And I don't mean that, in a derogatory way at all, but you can find a way. If you're passionate about it, if you keep, persevering, working hard at it, you can find a way.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that. And I couldn't agree with you more. Really, it's persistence and hard work. And also, I think you're entirely correct that success looks different for everyone. And also success isn't a one catch-all, a one path, because I think that especially in the arts, it is very much a New York, LA, those major cities. But if you're in a supportive community, which I feel like Arkansas definitely provides, and you're able to make ends meet, then you can keep going day by day, which is just beautiful. So I'm just going to make some last closing remarks, and then yeah, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you everyone who joined us for this live event or who's watching the recording. And of course, thank you, Dustyn, for participating. I hope that everyone can walk away from this Q&A knowing more about Dustyn's work and his motivations, and it's been an absolute joy. And just as kind of a shout out for a future Q&A on June 4th, I'll be interviewing Crystal Seawood, who had an exhibition with us in 2019, Boys to Men, and I'm very excited to talk to her too. So we're going to keep going with this event series and try to give artists as much credit as possible during this time. You can't see their art in person, but that doesn't mean that you can't be enriched online.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the Arts and Science Center for providing this format.
Of course. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.